Hurricane Wilma was the most intense tropical cyclone ever recorded in the Atlantic basin. Part of the record-breaking 2005 Atlantic hurricane season, which included 3 of the 6 most intense Atlantic hurricanes ever, Wilma was the 22nd storm, 13th hurricane, 6th major hurricane, 4th Category 5 hurricane, and 2nd most destructive hurricane of the 2005 season. A tropical depression formed in the Caribbean Sea near Jamaica on October 15, and intensified into a tropical storm 2 days later, which was named Wilma. After heading westward as a tropical depression, Wilma turned abruptly southward after becoming a tropical storm. Wilma continued intensifying, and eventually became a hurricane on October 18. Shortly thereafter, extreme intensification occurred, and in only 24 hours, Wilma became a Category 5 hurricane with winds of 185 mph. Intensity slowly leveled off after becoming a Category 5 hurricane, and winds had decreased to 150 mph before reaching the Yucatan Peninsula on October 20 and 21. After crossing the Yucatan Peninsula, Wilma emerged into the Gulf of Mexico as a Category 2 hurricane. As Wilma began accelerating to the northeast, gradual re-intensification occurred, and the hurricane became a Category 3 hurricane on October 24. Shortly thereafter, Wilma made landfall in Cape Romano, Florida with winds of 120 mph. As Wilma was crossing Florida, it had briefly weakened back to a Category 2 hurricane, but again re-intensified as it reached the Atlantic Ocean. The hurricane intensified into a Category 3 hurricane for the final occasion, but Wilma dropped below that intensity while accelerating northeastward. By October 26, Wilma transitioned into an extratropical cyclone southeast of Nova Scotia. Wilma made several landfalls, with the most destructive effects felt in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, Cuba, and the U.S. state of Florida. At least 62 deaths were reported, and damage is estimated at $29.1 a billion, $20.6 a billion of which occurred in the United States alone. As a result, Wilma is ranked among the top 5 most costly hurricanes ever recorded in the Atlantic and the 5th costliest storm in United States history. Meteorological history. A large area of disturbed weather developed across much of the Caribbean Sea during mid-October as a lower tropospheric low interacted with a broad area of disturbed weather, aided by an upper-level low across the region. A broad area of low pressure developed on October 13 to the southeast of Jamaica, and slowly became more concentrated as upper-level wind shear gradually decreased. Dvorak classifications began on October 14, and by late October 15 the surface circulation in the system became well enough defined, with sufficiently organized deep convection, for the National Hurricane Center to designate the system as Tropical Depression 24 while located about 220 mi east-southeast of Grand Cayman. The depression drifted southwestward because of the influence of 2 ridges to its north, and with warm water temperatures and a favorable upper-level environment it strengthened into Tropical Storm Wilma on October 17. Initially, development was slow, due to the large size of the storm and a flat pressure gradient. However, convection gradually organized, and from October 18 through October 19, Wilma underwent explosive deepening over the open waters of the Caribbean. In a 30-hour period, the pressure dropped from 982 millibar to the record low of 882 millibar, while the winds increased to 185 mph. Wilma weakened below Category 5 intensity on October 20 to 155 mph due to an eye wall replacement cycle and began to turn towards the northwest and further decreased in forward speed. The once tiny 2.3 mi was replaced by a 46 mi. Late on October 21, Wilma made landfall on the island of Cozumel at around 21:45 UTC with maximum sustained winds of 150 mph, and then again made a second landfall on the Mexican mainland 6 hours later and only slightly weaker. Wilma continued to slowly drift towards the north over the Yucatan Peninsula, although it weakened to a moderate hurricane while over land. It re-emerged over the southern Gulf of Mexico on October 23 around 0000 UTC. Despite Wilma spending 24 hours over land, it re-emerged with little intensity lost, and began to re-intensify shortly after. This was perhaps due to its large size and because the majority of its circulation remained over the warm waters of the northwest Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. A powerful trough turned the hurricane to the northeast and accelerated its forward motion. Its large eye remained well organized, and Wilma intensified despite increasing amounts of wind shear, briefly producing winds of 125 mph before hitting Cape Romano, Florida as a 120 mph major hurricane. Wilma crossed the state in about 4.5 hours and weakened to winds of 110 mph after entering the Atlantic Ocean near Jupiter, Florida. Key West received several feet of water in the low-lying areas and flooded homes. The Lower Keys also experienced an unusual flood. It occurred twice. First, as the storm approached Florida, it pushed water across the Keys from south to north. As the storm finally crossed into the Everglades, all the water that had been pushed by the storm was released as Wilma crossed the peninsula. The water then raced back across the Lower Keys a second time and went back out to sea. This caused additional flooding and costly damage. Possibly due to less friction of the eye wall or moving over warm waters of the Gulf Stream, Wilma again re-intensified to reach winds of 125 mph, before cold air and wind shear penetrated the inner core of convection. On October 26, it transitioned into an extratropical cyclone, and the next day the remnants of Wilma were absorbed by another extratropical storm over Atlantic Canada. Preparations, Mexico. Quintana Roo government officials declared a red alert on the evening of Wednesday, October 19. Classes were suspended in the state's northern municipalities and residents of coastal areas were advised to take refuge further inland. Tourists in the resort city of Cancun and its adjacent islands were told to return to their places of origin or head inland, while those unable to were relocated to designated hurricane shelters throughout the city. In neighboring Yucatan, classes were also suspended in 18 coastal municipalities. Central America. In Nicaragua, civil organizations were ordered to make hurricane preparations, while in El Salvador, the National Emergency Committee was activated. Cuba. In Cuba, preparations were made to evacuate 4 western provinces, including the Isle of Youth. In all, over 760,000 people were ordered to evacuate. Florida. A mandatory evacuation of residents was ordered for the Florida Keys in Monroe County and those in Collier County living west or south of US 41. County offices, schools and courts were closed Monday, October 24. At least 300 Keys evacuees were housed at the Monroe County shelter at Florida International University in Miami-Dade County. All Collier County public schools were declared closed for Friday, October 21. The schools were closed to allow parents and staff to prepare for the storm and potential evacuation, and also allowed for needed preparation of schools to be used as hurricane shelters. The schools remained closed on Monday, October 24, as the hurricane made landfall. Schools around Fort Myers and Tampa, as well as Sumter, Marion, Osceola, Pasco, and Polk counties, were closed on Monday, October 24. In other areas of central Florida, schools were closed in Flagler, Lake, Orange, and Volusia counties. Schools in Palm Beach and Broward counties were closed for 2 weeks because of extended power outages and some damage to school buildings. Schools in Collier and Miami-Dade counties were closed for a little over a week, including the University of Miami. Orange juice futures reached the highest level in 6 years on Wednesday, October 19, 2005, closing up 2.9 cents at $1.118 per pound. As dynamic models moved the storm's track east over Florida, oil futures eased as worries of another direct hit on the oil-producing regions of the Gulf of Mexico subsided. College and professional hockey games scheduled the weekend before Wilma's landfall were rescheduled for a later time. The professional football game scheduled for Sunday was moved ahead to Friday night. A concert by the industrial rock band 9 Inch Nails, expected to have taken place Monday, October 24, was postponed and later cancelled. Key West's Fantasy Fest held around each Halloween was postponed until December. Impact, Wilma was responsible for at least 63 total deaths and over $29 billion in damages. Caribbean, in Haiti, the outer bands of Wilma triggered mudslides, killing at least 12 people. Damage in the country totaled around $500,000. Wilma claimed one death in Jamaica as a tropical depression on October 16. It pounded the island for 3 days ending on October 18, flooding several low-lying communities and triggering mudslides that blocked roads and damaged several homes. Almost 250 people were in emergency shelters on the island. Damage on the island totaled $93.5 million. Mexico, at least 8 deaths were reported in Mexico. 5 were in the Playa del Carmen area due to a gas explosion caused by the strong winds. 4 deaths also were reported in Cozumel and another in Cancun due to wind blowing a window out. Another death, caused by a falling tree, was reported in the state of Yucatán. Pictures and television reports indicated extensive structural damage throughout the Cancun area, as well as significant flooding and many downed trees, power lines and scattered debris. Several homes had also collapsed. Rainfall amounts in excess of 23 inches were reported in several areas, with Isla Mujeres reporting 64 inches, 5 times what Hurricane Gilbert dropped. One gymnasium used as a shelter lost its roof, which forced the evacuation of more than 1,000 people staying there. During the storm, waves 5 to 8 meters high slammed against the coastline. Damage was extensive as well on Cozumel, with many broken windows, fallen trees and power lines, but less structural damage. It was comparable to the scene after Hurricane Emily back in July 2005, a storm of similar intensity at landfall, but faster moving. The governor of Quintana Roo, FAR copyright Lix Gonzalez Canto, said in an interview, "Never in the history of Quintana Roo have we seen a storm like this." Communication was initially limited, as telephone and electric services were completely out in the affected areas. However, in downtown Cancun, some telephone communications remained intact, and tourists went out and risked their lives to contact home. There were also extensive reports of looting of many businesses in Quintana Roo, particularly in Cancun. After Wilma passed, a sense of desperation developed in the region because people were being held in shelters due to the extensive damage. Thousands of tourists remained stranded in shelters, and the priority was to send them home immediately, according to President Vicente Fox. Buses arrived in Cancun from Mar Copyright Rider, where tourists were hoping to find flights home. The United States Embassy told tourists to go to Mar Copyright Rider, although the next day they had to change their announcements because Mar Copyright Rider had become so packed with people. The road to Mar Copyright Rider was very dangerous and practically impassable for taxis, yet people dealt with the exorbitant fees being charged for passage. The destruction left behind by Wilma in the Yucatán severely damaged the tourist industry there, as the storm affected some of the tourist hotspots of Mexico. Damage in Mexico totaled $7.5 billion, of which $4.6 billion was from agricultural damage. Cuba. In Cuba, a bus carrying evacuees crashed, killing 4 people, including 3 foreign tourists. Coastal flooding caused by Wilma's storm surge and flooding from the outer bands was reported in many areas, particularly around Havana. More than 250 homes were heavily flooded and rescuers required scuba gear, inflatable rafts and amphibious vehicles to reach the most severely flooded areas. Havana was also without power and wind damage was reported as a result of winds up to 85 mph. Officials in Cuba estimated total damage to be about $700 million. United States, Florida. At least 5 hurricane-related deaths were reported in the United States, all in Florida, and there were at least 26 deaths indirectly related to Wilma. Damage from Wilma was extensive and widespread over South Florida due to winds and flooding. After the hurricane had passed, a storm surge from the backwash of up to 8 ft from the Gulf of Mexico inundated a large portion of the lower Keys. The peak of the storm surge occurred when the eye of Wilma had already passed over the Naples area, and the sustained winds during the surge were less than 40 mph. Hurricane Wilma caused widespread destruction of critical infrastructure, including power, water and sewer systems. Florida Power and Light, the largest electricity utility in the state, reported more than 3,241,000 customers had lost power, equivalent to approximately 6 million people, with most residents getting power restored in €8 to 15 days. Running water was restored for most residents within 2 days. Broward and Palm Beach counties were hit particularly hard by the many tornadoes in the western portion of the hurricane. Most notably in downtown Fort Lauderdale, there was significant damage to older buildings, including the Broward County Courthouse, school board building and taller area office buildings built before the implementation of stricter building codes after Hurricane Andrew. The glass facades in a number of downtown buildings, notably the Templeton Building, were sheared off by high winds. Damage in Florida totaled $16.8 billion. As of 2009, there are still people waiting for insurance settlements and repairs on their homes in Dade and Broward counties. Southeastern United States. Few reports of effects from Hurricane Wilma exist in the United States outside of Florida, with minimal impact other than rain recorded in other states. Rainfall had extended into Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina and Virginia. Only a few areas had observed rain greater than 2 inches. Although only 2 inches were reported in Georgia and South Carolina, Hurricane Wilma dropped approximately 3 inches of rain of the Outer Banks of North Carolina on October 25. Bahamas. While passing the Bahamas, the hurricane produced hurricane-force winds and a powerful storm surge, flooding southwestern coastal areas of Grand Bahama and destroying hundreds of buildings. In western settlements on the island of Grand Bahama, graves were washed up with skeletal remains lying in the streets. Damage totaled about $100 a million, almost entirely on the western half of the island. The central portion of Grand Bahama, including in and around Freeport, reported minor to moderate damage, while the eastern end received little to no damage. 1 child died on the island from the flooding. Elsewhere in the Bahamas, moderate damage occurred on Bimini and Abaco, while islands farther to the south reported minimal wind damage. Wilma struck the Bahamas during the filming of Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. The service roads were destroyed and several trailers turned over. The 2 principal ships, the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman, were relatively undamaged and the cast and crew were evacuated on the Friday before the hurricane hit. Aftermath. United States, Florida's sugar industry was hard hit. The cropping had already started and had to be halted indefinitely. Damage to sugarcane crops was critical and widespread. Citrus canker spread rapidly throughout southern Florida following Hurricane Wilma, creating further hardships on an already stressed citrus economy due to damage from Wilma and previous years' hurricanes. Citrus production estimates fell to a low of 158 million boxes for the 2005-2006 production seasons from a high of 240 million for 2003-2004. In March 2006, the National Weather Service opened its new Hurricane and Weather Forecasting Center at 1315 White Street in Key West. The center is designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane and associated storm surge. It had been under construction during the 2005 hurricane season. In January 2006, artists were invited to exhibit sculptures inspired by the storm in an outdoor exhibit at Fort Zachary Taylor in Key West. By late September 2010, roughly $9.2 billion had been paid for more than 1 million insurance claims that had been filed throughout Florida in relation to Hurricane Wilma. Mexico, the popular Mexican resort towns of Playa del Carmen, Cozumel, and Cancun all suffered significant damage from Wilma, causing a major loss of tourism income. The MTV Video Music Awards Latin America 2005 was to be held Wednesday, October 19 at the XCARET Eco Park in Quintana Roo, Mexico. The 2005 edition of these awards was postponed, however, because of the approach of Hurricane Wilma toward the Mexican Riviera Maya. MTV had moved the date from October 20 to 19 in an attempt to avoid the hurricane, but eventually decided to cancel the show. The 2005 edition eventually took place using a modified format on December 22. Cuba. The United States offered emergency aid to Cuba, and to the surprise of the State Department, the Cuban government accepted. Many times in the past, including during Hurricane Dennis, the U.S. offered aid, but the Cuban government declined. The State Department sent 3 damage assessors to Havana to determine their needs. Retirement. Due to significant damage in Mexico and Florida, the name Wilma was officially retired in April 2006 by the World Meteorological Organization, and will never be used for an Atlantic storm again. It was replaced by Whitney in 2011. Whitney will be on the name list again in 2017. Records and naming. The storm was named Wilma, the first time the W name was used in the Atlantic basin since alphabetical naming began in 1950. With Wilma, the 2005 hurricane season broke the record for most storms in a season previously held by the 1933 season. Moving slowly over warm water with little wind shear, Wilma strengthened steadily and became a hurricane on October 18. The 13th hurricane of the season, Wilma broke the record set in 1969 for most storms of hurricane strength in one season for the Atlantic basin. The barometric pressure measured in Wilma, 882 millibar, is currently the lowest recorded pressure for a tropical cyclone in the Atlantic basin, as well as the lowest pressure for any cyclone measured in the Western Hemisphere. It also reached its 882 millibar pressure in a span of 24 hours, making it the fastest pressure drop of any storm in the Atlantic basin, although Hurricane Felix of 2007 reached a greater wind speed rise in 51 hours. At its peak intensity, the eye of Wilma was about 2.3 miles in diameter, the smallest known eye of an Atlantic hurricane. In Mexico, Isla Mujeres reported 64 inches of rainfall, 5 times what Hurricane Gilbert dropped. This set a 24-hour rainfall record for the country of Mexico, and was the highest point total for rainfall from a tropical cyclone since Hurricane Mitch in 1998. Wilma is also the costliest hurricane in Mexican history. Wilma was the first retired W name since the World Meteorological Organization started retiring names in 1954. It was the strongest Atlantic hurricane to be retired, and when it was retired, it made 2005 the season with the most retired names, with 5. The old record was a 3-way tie with 4 names retired in 1955, 1995, and 2004. Wilma was replaced with the name Whitney. Had the unnamed 2005 Azores subtropical storm been operationally recognized, it would have been named Subtropical Storm Tammy, and storms forming after October 4 would have been moved 1 name down the list. Wilma would have consequently been given the name Alpha, while Tropical Storm Zeta would have been given Eta, in accordance with the convention to name tropical cyclones after the Greek alphabet if the scheduled list of names runs out. See also: List of 2005 Atlantic hurricane season storms, List of Atlantic hurricanes, List of Category 5 Atlantic hurricanes, List of Florida hurricanes, List of natural disasters in Haiti, Timeline of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season, Tropical Storm Wilma, References. External links: Tropical Cyclone Report on Hurricane Wilma, the NHC's Archive on Hurricane Wilma, Storm Chaser George Kawarani's documents The Eye of Hurricane Wilma, U.S. rainfall for Hurricane Wilma from HPC, Wilma Pictures, Satellites Images, the Disaster Center's coverage of Hurricane Wilma.